There have been roughly, not exactly, but roughly two schools of thought that have dominated the conversation in epistemology for many, many years, millennia, really. And it concerns where knowledge ultimately comes from. And the two schools of thought that have some overlaps, but certainly are two different approaches to this question, can be broken down into one view called rationalism and empiricism. So let's start with rationalism and try to support that view um, with some examples. So, according to rationalist philosophers, at least some knowledge is innate. And what we mean by innate is roughly born with, or born with those features, whether through evolution or through some other process like the soul. And according to rationalists, at least some knowledge, this is Plato's view, we're born with, and we might discover it later or we might uncover it, but there's some knowledge that might already be imprinted on the mind or the soul, and we know these things innately. So the mind can discover these truths through reason alone without appeal to experience. So rationalism is, again, the view that at least some knowledge is innate, we're born with it, and the mind can discover such truths using human reason alone without any appeal to human experience. The other view that has been very influential in the history of epistemology is called empiricism. And we associate, for good reason, empiricism with the rise of modern science. And by modern science, I mean the scientific revolution, the so-called scientific revolution of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, right? So empiricism is the view that knowledge comes from experience, not reason alone. It comes from our senses. And most empiricists think that we're not born with any innate knowledge. Some philosophers have thought that the best way to conceptualize knowledge is to think of or combine the best features of both views, both empiricism and rationalism. So that captures the view very roughly of the famous philosopher Immanuel Kant, who argued that knowledge comes from both sources. One major challenge to knowledge that is mentioned in the reading and that maybe you've thought about in other contexts is the problem of skepticism. So skepticism comes in a couple different varieties, but very roughly, skepticism is the view about epistemology that we lack knowledge in some fundamental way. And it usually comes in various degrees. This is the view that we can't know anything at all, that essentially whatever account of knowledge we come up with, whether it's the JTB account or some other account of knowledge, we never really meet that bar because there's always some reason to doubt what we think we know, right? And there's a lot of other interesting things we could say here about this topic, but relativism very roughly is that truth just depends upon what a person believes. This is Rene Descartes. So in his infamous Meditations on First Philosophy, he provides a groundwork for not only epistemology, but also how we should conceptualize scientific knowledge in particular. Okay, so Descartes is a rationalist, so he does think that we use human reason, and particularly he sees sense experience as unreliable, an unreliable source of knowledge because our senses often go wrong. So from all this doubting, from all the skepticism that we can entertain, he thinks, well, we can at least arrive at something. So he says, it seems to me that already I can establish as a general rule that all things which I perceive very clearly and very distinctly are true. And he does that because he gives us various interesting and compelling thought experiments about being deceived by an evil genius, being deceived by God, maybe dreaming, things that would later be used for things like computer simulation thought experiments. Maybe this is all one big computer simulation to show that the senses are really unreliable. So if I think, therefore I am, because no matter if we're being deceived or if we're incapacitated or dreaming, so long as we're thinking, Descartes thinks, it's proving that we exist because there has to be something there to be deceived. I'm not going to go over all the details here. But essentially what Descartes is doing is he's trying to show how we can get out of skepticism. And for him, the only way we can get out of skepticism is by not relying on the senses as a foundation for knowledge. Because as I mentioned, the senses are unreliable. Well, the human mind, human reason, but it has to start with human reason and has to start with a thinking thing. And from there, we can build other things that we can know very famously. Okay, so let's look at a famous empiricist. So Descartes is a rationalist because he thinks the senses are unreliable. One was by John Locke, who we'll skip over for the moment. But another famous attack on the account of knowledge provided by Descartes is from the Scottish philosopher David Hume, who comes a little bit after Descartes, 1771 to 1776. He's often called the last great British empiricist. So his view is that Descartes has it completely backwards. He thinks all philosophy and all science is influenced by the senses. Hume thinks, nope, all we need to focus on is experimental methods of science and apply them to knowledge. So we need to focus not on reason, but on experience. And how do we do that? Well, that's what empiricism is about. It's about talking about how we perceive things, what the senses tell us. That's the only thing we can rely on. Hume, however, he thinks we have a reason to doubt all beliefs that aren't founded on experience. So that's why I said he's kind of the opposite of Descartes, because Hume thinks if it's not from experience, then we have every reason to doubt it. Okay, so Hume is often called, and I think appropriately, a moderate skeptic. Hume's famous answer is no. So a very interesting, much discussed problem of induction that David Hume gives us that occupies a lot of very famous people for years to come, thinking about deep problems and at least asking for justification for the reasoning and thought processes of things that we care about, like science, like philosophy, right?